I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're venturing into a wonderful book called The Longstock Chronicles. It's written by a terrific author. His name is Joseph Marvici. This narrative takes us back to a remote Canadian community in the 1970s where access is only by river or rail, and life blends old world charm with the spirit of the hippie era. Join us right now as we explore the adventures and challenges of living off the grid, as told through the eyes of those who called Longstock home. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank our team at Bookside Press for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Joe, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Well, it's great to be here.
Like I said to you before we started recording, this is quite a story, quite a life you have led. This is basically your memoir, your story of life off the grid, right?
Well, it's kind of a memoir, but it's also a novel too, because I have uh embellished on a little bit of it,
Yeah.
and I changed some of the names of places and people and that, but it's basically it's based on a true story.
Exactly. Based on a true story that you know very well, which is great. But the
Yeah,
names have been
yeah, because
changed
I
to
lived
protect
it.
the innocent. That's good.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what life was like in Longstock.
Well, you know, we, we were caught up in the back to the land movement, the hippie back to the land movement, because
Mhm.
the hippie movement, uh, metamorphosized into the back to the land movement, and so we tried to find some land in an isolated area. That's how we got there to Longworth. Uh, my wife at the time took a trip with the truck and because she was driving me crazy, really, she wanted to get out of Denver, and she found this place, Longstock, and so we went up there and looked at it, and we liked it, and it was isolated. At the time that I bought the place, we had to come down the river 16 miles to get in there, and then it was 3 miles on the road to get home, or get to the place we bought, and then during the years, uh, the highways department brought the road up closer, though it was still on the other side of the river. So you still had to come, instead of going downriver 60 miles, you went upriver about 5 miles. And usually the first couple of years, I depended on my neighbors to navigate the river, but then I got a riverboat, and so I could do it myself. And I ended up taking some of the neighbors, down the river, picking them up and to go into town and that sort of thing. But it was it was a throwback into the old times because I had to build my own house. I built it on logs, and you know, a lot of the material that we had to buy had to come up the river in the river boats or down the river on a raft. Made, but it was it's a young man's game.
Yeah, I
So
was
I
going
was
to
a young
say,
man at that time.
it
And
sounds like every day is an adventure when you're dependent on either going 60 miles down a river or 5 miles up a river and then hiking 3 miles over to your house in
yeah,
conditions that are not always perfect. I mean, you're in Canada, it snows a lot,
yeah,
it's cold, right?
yeah. Well, it snows in the winter, but this is summertime. Summertime, it's warm as anywhere else.
Yeah.
Uh, it doesn't get really hot, but it gets warm as it was in anywhere else. But in the wintertime, there is a lot of snow,
Yeah.
and I had an old 41 power wagon that I
Mhm.
crossed it on two boats and got it across and drove in there with it. And so that's what we used to get from the river to home, all the time.
Amazing.
And so because there was a road over there, like the the town of Longstock was among many towns that were along that rail line from you know east of Prince George, and most of them had sawmills,
Mm,
and they used the rails to get out and that. But then they put the highway in across so we could go on the river.
right.
But the river was something you dealt with almost every day,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. How long did you live in Longstock?
Uh, 25 years.
Wow, it's amazing.
And
So,
see, there was no road during the 70s and the 80s, and then the early 90s, the road came in from the other side, and it changed the whole place
mm,
once the road came in.
yeah,
Because uh, prior to that, you depended on your neighbors all the time. They'd always tell you when you always get a visit from somebody when someone was, you needed to know, or someone was coming across the river. And there was a radio program out of Prince George called uh, Messages to Isolated Areas,
mm,
and that would come on in the morning about 7:30 every morning. So if someone was coming in, someone that you knew was coming in on a train, or you had to meet them across the river, it would be on those messages. So, and if you didn't hear it, someone would come out and tell you, you know. There was a community of people that actually moved out there with the same idea. They want to live in an isolated place, and so there, the town had about a population of about 30 or 35 people. Sometimes it would go up and down, up and down. And there were times when there was only 10, but
What about a
go up.
grocery store? What about medical care? What about gasoline? What about firewood? What about all of that stuff?
Well, the stuff you could do right there, like the firewood, you got it right there. Yeah,
You cut your
on the
own.
land.
Yeah.
Like I had 160 acres there,
Mm.
so it had a lot of wood on it.
Yeah.
But for the groceries and medical, usually in the beginning we go on a train
Mm.
to get out there. But once I got a riverboat, then and sometimes other people would take us to ride down the river, and we go on the boat. We'd have our trucks parked across the river, so we'd have to take the 5 mile ride down there. And the weather wasn't always the greatest for coming
Yeah.
back,
Yeah.
and so but we came back, and I had the old power wagon on the one side, on the
Mhm.
Longstock side, so we take that to get home. You
Yeah.
know,
Amazing.
Uh,
Is there one adventure or one incident of living along the Fraser River that really sticks out or stands out that you write about in the book?
well, uh, when you're talking about the wild, one time I was coming up the river in my riverboat, and I seen something swim in the river. I thought it was a moose,
Hmm.
but as I got closer, it was a grizzly,
Right.
and all you could see was the head and the hump sticking out of the water,
Wow.
and the rest of him was in the water. So I got up close, about 50 feet away. I don't want to get too close because,
Yeah.
sometimes you hear stories of grizzlies turning around and grabbing the side of the boat,
I was gonna
swamping the
say
boat.
flip you over easy, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, at that time, I had a 24-foot riverboat, wood riverboat. But so I got close to the grizzly, and then he came out of the water on the other side, and he was huge.
Mm.
It was he must have been like over 1,000 pounds, 1,200 pound grizzly, and of course his fur was all wet from being in the river, so the water just come pouring off of him, and the bank was really steep right there,
Right.
and so he was harumphing going up the bank, and he tearing down willows and trees and everything is coming down, as he's going up the bank, he's grabbing them and he's pulling them down. And that was like one of the most spectacular things I've ever seen in the wild,
Amazing.
and
Oh,
because he was very big.
yeah, he was a big boy. That sounds like it.
Yeah.
This story, what do you hope readers would take away from it? A lot of people today are interested in sustainable living and living off the grid. You did it, a half a century ago. Um, Tell us how you think the audience will react to it and what you hope they take away from your story.
Well, at the time that I lived there, and we were doing stuff all the time, and it didn't really seem that much different than the average person.
Mm,
But at the time I lived there, but after I moved away, I realized that the average person never did anything of the kind. They never did anything like that. And
right,
so, and that's when I decided, I write the book because the experience that I had, uh, most people never had those experiences,
right.
so they can relive it through the book, by reading the book. And uh, it was that's what I think they could take away from it.
Amazing. Yeah, amazing. What becomes normal for you is not normal for everyone else. Life is harder. Life is an adventure. I think life, in many ways, I'm sure you agree, is kind of lived more when you're living like that because you're aware of your survival. You're aware of the
Yeah,
weather that's coming. You're aware of the provisions you have on hand. You just aren't walking down the block to the 7-Eleven to get some smokes and some bread for tomorrow morning, right?
that's that's right. You had to make sure you got everything when you went into town that you needed, because
Exactly.
once you got out there, it was, you're not getting anything more.
Amazing. Let me
And
just
then,
ask you this before we leave. What made you finally leave?
well, the once the road came in, a different type of person moved in,
Right.
and it was just not the same. And and the sense of community that you had when in say the from the early 70s until the road came in around the early 90s, it, it didn't exist anymore, that like it did in those I think it was 17 or 18 years I lived there without the road. It
Right.
depended on the river. So it was very much a community thing then. And even in the winter time, when the river started to jam up with ice, downriver about 10 miles, there was a canyon down there. It was kind of a bottleneck. So at first, when it got cold, the ice would start flowing in the river, and it would get thicker and thicker and thicker, and then it would jam up at the bottleneck and back up the 10 miles. And, it freeze the river. It stopped moving. The ice would stop moving. So we would go down there as a community, and we would uh,
Break up the
set
ice.
up fire
Oh,
pump with a fire hose and blow the snow off uh, part of the river. And some people would go up on the bank and cut willows. We'd mark the crossing
hmm.
because when it was blowing the snow, and sometimes you couldn't see it. When
Amazing.
the river was all white there in the winter, and you had to have these willows sticking up so you'll know where that crossing was.
Amazing. Amazing.
And
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
so we would go as a community. We go like do part of it one day, and it was usually cold, so it would freeze it up, and then we go out that far, blow the snow off a little bit more the next day. I'd say the ice was about 800 to 1,000 feet across.
Amazing.
So
Amazing.
once it got solid, then you could go across, and even to the point where sometimes when you got real cold weather and not too much snow on the crossing, you could drive your truck across.
Wow.
You know,
You just don't want to
but
be wrong. You know,
you don't want to be on the wrong side when it breaks up, you know.
exactly, exactly. Quite a story, quite a life. Folks at home, if you're interested in being a pioneer, if you're interested in sustainable living, if you're interested in living off the grid, Joe Marvici did it a half a century ago. I don't even know if you can recreate the experience he had because things are different today. We have cell phones, we have computers, we have satellites, we have all that stuff. But he was doing it when he really just got by with grit. He has chronicled it all in a book that he has novelized. It's a part memoir, part novel. It's called The Longstock Chronicles. It's written by Joseph Marvici. It takes us back to a remote northern Canadian community in the 1970s where the only access is by river or by rail, and where old world charm blends with the spirit of the hippie era. It's an amazing read. It's an amazing life. It's an amazing story. And this would be an amazing movie. So, Hollywood, if you're listening, let's turn this into something. That'd be great.
It's incidentally, there's going to be a Longstock Chronicles too.
Awesome. Wonderful.
The 70 is the first one, the 70s. The next one is the 80s, and some remarkable things were done in the 80s too,
I'm
before we
sure.
got the road.
Uh,
So that'll be coming out. I'm working on it now, so
Sounds
it'll
great.
be
Looking
coming out
forward to it.
eventually.
Wonderful. We'll have you back on the show when
Okay.
that book is out. Joe, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Good talking to you, Logan.
Good talking to you, my friends. And folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.